Michael Rosen in your London home. Welcome to Hard Talk.
Thanks for having me, Stephen. Thank you.
It's a great pleasure to have you, not least because I'm very well aware that not so very long ago you went through a ghastly near-death experience thanks to COVID-19. It clearly hasn't sapped your creative juices, but why on earth did you want to revisit that dark period by writing about it?
I think it's a matter of compulsion, Stephen. I think for anybody who's in the arts, you find that whatever medium you work in, you need to express yourself through it. So if I was a painter or a dancer or a musician, maybe I would have expressed my feelings about what happened through those media. But because I'm a writer, I found that after I came out of hospital, that's after 3 months in hospital and a couple of weeks before that being very ill, the first thing I wanted to do was put some words down on the page, one word after another, one line after another, just finding out what had happened, what I thought about what had happened, and how I felt at that very moment that I was sitting there with a pen in my hand.
Very interesting that you put it that way, finding out what had happened, because, of course, for a significant number of days, you had no idea what was happening to you. You were unconscious. You were in an induced coma. So I guess you've had to retrace that time through doctors, nurses, your own close family who've sort of told you what they were going through and, by extension, what you were going through.
Exactly. I was in that induced coma for 40 days. And though we talk about being unconscious and conscious as if they're two very different things, when I piece it together, there's the period for maybe the next 10 days where I was coming out of that coma, and then another whole period where I can see now, looking back on it, my mind was woozy. I didn't know what was going on. And even if I thought I did know what was going on, I then quite quickly forgot it. So my wife, Emma, would say to me, you were in a coma, and I would go, yes, as if I understood it. And then a day later, I'd say to her, what did you say? And when was this? And basically, it was all of April and a good chunk of May. So it kind of disappeared.
You have written before, very movingly, about death, because tragically you lost your own son Eddie when I believe he was 18 years old, and you then wrote a book about that experience. But when this was your own death that you were confronting, did it in some ways surprise you, some of the feelings you had? Because you were aware, I mean, I think the doctor told you as you were put into the coma there was only a 50% chance you were going to wake up again. Did your own feelings about death surprise you?
Yes. I mean, at that stage, you've reminded me that the doctor did say that. He said, we're going to put you to sleep. And I asked him whether I'd wake up. And he said, well, you've got a 50-50 chance. And I said, and if you don't put me to sleep, well, he said 0. And I remember actually thinking at that very moment that, oh, well, 50-50, that's quite a good, well, that's not bad odds, is it really? Because I think I was so lightheaded with the lack of oxygen in my body. So at that moment, I didn't think about death. I just thought, well, I stand a good chance of waking up. Very good. Let's do it. I mean, it's quite comical, really. When I look back on it, I feel a kind of strange chill, really, that it was really touch and go. And that's how it turned out, in actual fact. 42% of my intensive care ward did actually die while I was in there. So it was 58-42. But afterwards, as I was coming to realize what had happened, I did indeed. I thought about Eddie. I thought about my mum and dad. I thought, what do I know about death? What do any of us know about it? And, you know, that state, that medium state of not being dead and sort of not being alive, well, kind of alive, I did think about that, yes, a lot.
Did spirituality come into it? Did you sort of perhaps feel more than you might have expected, a higher power or anything beyond yourself?
No, not at all, not at any point. So if you like, interpret spirituality as thinking about the thing the spirit, if you like, inside us that keeps us alive. We could be technical about hearts and brains and blood circulation and so on. But the sense of will and purpose, then yes, I did think a lot about that, but I never thought about, as you put it, a kind of being or a power outside of myself. No, I never did think along those lines. That's not in my belief system, and it didn't come to me at any point. I did have very strange dreams, and I did dwell on mythology, but that's slightly different.
Yeah, I want to come back to your belief systems, Michael, later in this conversation. But for now, I want to keep you back in the spring of 2020 in the hospital, and as you say, in this sort of half world, not quite living, not dead. At that particular time, you were very isolated because it was the pandemic. You couldn't see loved ones, they couldn't visit you, and you were very reliant on the doctors and nurses. And you've reflected a lot on that and on their role in your saving of life, basically. And it also resonates with things you've written before about the British National Health Service.
Yes, indeed. I mean, it occurred to me as I was sort of coming out of this thing and trying to understand what had happened and the way in which nurses were treating me right then and there that I was conscious of. And in particular, looking at what's called a patient diary. I can lift it up there so that you can see it. And you can see it's just an exercise book, and it's got patient diary typed on the front. And this is what nurses wrote to me after their night shift, or indeed after their day shift. And they'd write it in the form of letters to you, Michael, hello, Michael, and then signed off, Holly, or whoever. And this is so moving because they're describing what they're doing in quite technical terms about suctioning my secretions and things like that, but at the same time full of personal detail and saying how we're rooting for you. We want you to do this. And one nurse says that how she knows I support Arsenal Football Club and she supports a club called Derby and that I turn away. And then another one says that how my arms are flailing around in the bed and all the time wishing me well, sort of almost impelling me to get better, even though I'm completely unconscious. And I started to think about this, and I thought they're using all their knowledge and skills and all their training, everything they've been trained to do, but they're going the extra mile. They're doing something that we as parents do when we've got sick children and we give them the medicines that we give them, and then we stroke them and we sing to them and we talk to them. And these nurses were doing the same thing. They were saying, we were holding your hand. Why? Well, because of the level of care, whatever word. And I began to think that they were behaving like parents. And then I say, but they're not my parents. So I'm left with this incredible feeling.
Michael, if you would, I want you to read one particular poem, because of course you're a poet and a writer, and this one poem that you wrote long before the pandemic hit the world, it's called These Are the Hands. It was written to celebrate the 60th anniversary of the creation of the NHS, I think back in 2008. But I think people right around the world would love to hear this short poem because it captures something very important about the way in which healthcare workers give of themselves to keep people like you in your condition alive at the worst of times. Would you read it for us?
These are the hands that touch us first, feel your head, find the pulse, and make your bed. These are the hands that tap your back, test the skin, hold your arm, wheel the bin, change the bulb, fix the drip, pour the jug, replace your hip. These are the hands that fill the bath, mop the floor, flick the switch, soothe the sore, burn the swabs, give us a jab, throw out sharps, design the lab. And these are the hands that stop the leaks, empty the pan, wipe the pipes, carry the can, clamp the veins, make the cast, log the dose, and touch us last.
Touch us last. Yes, that's quite a last line. What do you feel you've lost, Michael, as a result of this terrible experience you went through? Because it's pretty much a year ago now, but I know physically you describe yourself as recovering rather than recovered. What have you lost, both physically and maybe mentally as well?
Well, physically, I've lost most of the sight in this eye, my left eye. It's fogged, and most of the hearing in my left ear. because one of the things that COVID does, it mucks around with our circulation and blood systems. So I got microbleeds in my brain as well as blood clots in my lungs. So I've lost that. I've lost most of the feeling in my toes. So I have numb toes. And then the other thing I've lost is my sense of balance. I do suffer from dizziness or vertigo, whatever you want to call it. So I have to kind of accommodate that. So that covers the physical side 1 year on, and a bit of exhaustion. I mean, every now and then I just sort of flake out, as we say sometimes, and just lie down on the sofa and go to sleep for half an hour. But mentally, I guess I've lost things like a certain kind of frivolity, a certain kind of maybe a bit of my sense of humour. I don't know.
Have you lost confidence, Michael, do you think?
Yes, I think a bit. I think that's partly the balance thing. The balance is very disturbing because you walk across a room and suddenly you think the wall is coming towards you or the floor is coming towards you. And even though your head is saying, no, it isn't, it sort of feels like that, you know, so whoa. And then that just suddenly rocks me because in my other life, I do sometimes do performances in schools and in theatres for children mostly. And that involves standing about and sometimes running about, waving my arms about. And I don't think I'd have the confidence to do that without thinking I might fall over. And of course, the children find that very funny because it's a pratfall, as we call it in the business. And I would think, no, I didn't mean to do that. So that sort of yes, I feel a bit edgy about it.
What about anger? Because you have commented quite a lot in the last few weeks and months your feelings about the way the British government handled the British COVID crisis. Does anger fuel you right now?
Yes, partly. There is some anger. So, as you try and sort of tease out the various elements that I feel, some of it's distress, some of it's sadness, some of it's regret, there is anger in there too. I don't think that the government behaved properly at the very time I was getting the infection. I think they were basically working on a kind of no policy principle, which in its own way was what has been called herd immunity without vaccination. So that people were meeting, there were big spreaders, as they call them, football matches and so on, pop concerts, and no restrictions in schools where I was visiting. I visited Arsenal Football Club twice with full packed ground, just in the period where I must have got ill. And I even came into the BBC to do a programme with no restrictions on the doors or anything like that. So there was no sense in those first 2 weeks in March in this country that there was anything particular to worry about. There was a talk about washing hands, but no idea of social distancing, no idea of closing down any of these mass spreading events. And I believe the Atletico Madrid fans came in from Spain to, I think, to Liverpool, if I'm right, right in that time as well. So this is all very worrying, and it hasn't been unpicked yet.
A pandemic is a collective experience in many ways. I just wonder what you think it's taught us about the cohesion, the bonds that bind a society like that in Britain.
I felt several times that some of those bonds have been broken. I felt even before I got ill, or maybe just as I was getting ill, that there was a sense that if this illness was largely affecting, attacking, and indeed killing people over the age of 70, that somehow or other this mattered less than if it was attacking people under the age of 70.
And to be clear, Michael, for those who don't know, you are over 70.
Yes, indeed. I was 73 when I got ill, and I'm 75 now, yes. So I had this in a variety of ways. I perceived this either by comments that you just heard people saying, well, I'm young, or somebody saying, well, it does only seem to be only, that key word, only seem to be affecting older people, old people. And indeed, I had an interchange with a journalist who's quite famous in this country when she was rather delightedly leaping on the fact there was a report that some people who had what we call long COVID, the post-COVID syndrome, what I've got in other words, saying that their descriptions were lurid. And she was rather pleased about this. So I jocularly said on one of the social media platforms, oh, yes, I wasn't really ill. I was just hiding under the table. And she replied, yes, we know you were ill, Michael, but you're 74 or 73. And I found myself thinking, what's but about being 74? I mean, where does this but or only, where do these words come from in describing older people? And so I felt alarmed by that, and I still feel alarmed by it. You talked about the bonds. Well, one of the almost sacred bonds, if you like, in society goes from the cradle to the grave, which is sort of what I was suggesting in the poem that I read, that, you know, we bind ourselves together. And a day in the life of an 80-year-old is no less valid than a day in the life of a 5-year-old or a 25-year-old. You know, these days are valid. They are life. That's what we have.
Now, look, thankfully, you are still writing. You're still writing children's fiction. You are well known across the world for having written one of the most popular kids' books of all time, We're Going on a Bear Hunt, which last time I checked, I think it sold more than 8 million copies. You have had time to reflect on something that you've written about and talked about a lot, which is you feel that the education system is failing to inject enough sort of fun and engagement with books amongst today's generation of kids. Words and books are your lifeblood, and it seems you feel that school is failing to make words and books accessible and fun for kids. Why, and what can be done about it?
Well, I think that in this country, particularly in England, that part of the United Kingdom, there's been an overemphasis on testing, and the kind of testing, what we call summative testing. In other words, the testing that comes at the end of a period of study. And not only that, that it's what we call high stakes testing. In other words, it's government run and it's centralized, and then it's used in order to grade schools in a league table. Now, this puts an enormous pressure on teachers and then in turn on the students, whether they're 6-year-olds, 8-year-olds, 11-year-olds, or when the real big blow comes at 16. And what this does is have an effect of narrowing the curriculum, forcing teachers, largely against their will, to teach to the test. So this squeezes out a lot of what I might call open interpretation in the subjects that I'm interested in, open interpretation, forms of free thinking, and indeed invention. So interpretation, investigation, interpretation, all I words, I find are being squeezed. Teachers are doing brilliantly and wonderfully in finding ways so that their lives and their work is not restricted in the way that I've just described. But it's a struggle. And then the latest news.
So you're kind of suggesting what? Education has become far too utilitarian, all about tests, all about sort of the mechanics of passing regular assessments. But I wonder if there's something else going on too, which isn't about schools and teaching, just about the way we live our lives. I mean, we see 2- and 3-year-olds now who have become used to swiping with their fingers on screens. We see primary school kids who have smartphones. Could that be something to do with the fact children aren't engaging with books, perhaps in the way they used to?
It could be. Actually, as the description you've just given, I've seen toddlers in their buggies with phones and looking at things of one sort or another. There's a very strange thing going on, culturally speaking, which is that we're giving children a level of autonomy. We could argue how much it is, but even so, handing them things like screens and playing with them and so on, at the very same moment that classrooms are, in a sense, being asked, even if whether they do it or not is another matter, but being asked to close down and be much more going back to forms of instruction that I was familiar with in the 1950s, of teacher talking, passing on information, demanding that the students immediately absorb it and then immediately produce results in forms of pre-tests before the real test. And all this is a form of, as I said before, a form of summative testing. I'm totally in favor of children being assessed, but there are other ways of doing it, what we call formative assessment, where what we do is engage with the students in order to find out what they know and what they don't know as part of a process that you do as you go along.
A final thought, and it's prompted by something that you wrote about just a short time ago. You described how an old friend asked you if you see the world differently now, and I think your response then was, yes, but I'm not quite sure how. Well, you've probably had a few more weeks, months to think about it. Can you now say how you see the world differently after your experiences of the last 18 months?
It feels very unstable. I'll say that. It feels unstable in the way in which people have taken up many conspiracy theories, both about this pandemic. Look at the words they've invented: scamdemic, funny in its own way, but it wasn't a scam for me. It's a witty neologism. So it feels unstable in that way. And then also it feels unstable in terms of how are we going to put all this back together again? This country voted to separate itself off from Europe. We don't know the consequences of that. And people are very, very divided. You only have to go onto social media and the fury that appears there with the name calling, and more than that, I mean, fury with two sides of a line that sometimes you think, what are we arguing about?
That's an interesting thought. I mean, has everything you went through, including the near-death experience, has it made you feel more or less passionate about your political beliefs, about your own sort of identity? Because you've written so much about your Jewishness, about your socialism. Do you feel more engaged today, or has this experience perhaps led you to back off a little bit, feel a bit mellower and a bit like you want to focus on family, friends, and a bit less on the world outside?
Interesting. Yes, it's an interesting balance. Obviously, I had to retreat into myself in order to get better. So since I was ill, I've had to spend time thinking about what exercise am I going to do? Shall I lift this medicine ball? I mean, it's both trivial and also terribly important to that moment. But I have also spent the last 20 years researching a bit of invisible history in my own family. A lot of Jewish, certainly Eastern European Jews, will know of disappearances and disappeared stories from family. And so I have spent a lot of time doing that and dwelling on how the Holocaust impacted on my family. So it's both personal and social and political. So that's been something that I've also returned to. And I'm very pleased to say that the village where my father's uncle was arrested is going to commemorate him, probably by naming the local park after him. And I find that very, very moving. It's very, very difficult for France to acknowledge what happened, of course. I'm not saying that in any sneery way. And for a local village mayor to risk, if you like, digging up the past in order to commemorate something. And he's a history teacher. So it's rather a wonderful thing.
Michael, I just think at the end, people around the world will want to know that COVID has not undermined your whimsy, your imagination, your fun, and your desire to keep writing. Can you just confirm all of that?
I confirm it 100%. A book coming out soon called Rigatoni the Pasta Cat. How about that?
I'd expect nothing less from you. Michael Rosen, thanks for being on Hard Talk.
Thanks for having me, Stephen.